Hey everyone, Coach Patrick here back with another Watch, Discuss, Learn video session for you. Something I try and do every other month as an opportunity to deepen our learning, improve the community's understanding of critical parts of the endurance training process, racing, all the good stuff. This month I want to talk to you a little bit about managing your data, collecting and using your data. A lot of people have been asking on the team about what are best practices or how do things work. So I'm going to work from macro to micro in today's session and talk to you a little bit about why we want the data, what you're going to do with it, how to collect it, and then ultimately go through a couple charts and how I would like you to think about your data, or how I recommend that you use your data. I'm going to be recording this over several different sessions, so if it seems a little wonky moving forward, please bear with me. The content is so deep that it's not something I can simply do in one session. Okay, so first and foremost, let's talk about why are we collecting data? So as you know, as an athlete, whether you've been in the game for a long time or you're recently new, there's all sorts of pieces of gear that you can use to collect data. Back in the day, it used to just be a heart rate monitor. Then it became a heart rate monitor and a power meter for your bicycle. Now we have power meters for your running. We have power meters for swimming. We have, you can track with your heart rate and accelerometers in your heart rate strap, for example. You get all sorts of data on, vertical oscillation, ground contact time of your foot. In short, there's no lack of data out there. And so people say, well, why I gotta collect this? It's such a job. It's so much work. Well, because we collect this data, or I encourage you to collect this data, because it really helps you get a better understanding of who you are. So we all sort of have a sense of, this is who I am. I'm Patrick. I'm 43 years old. This is, I like to train and race, and this is what I do. And I'm good at running, or I'm good at biking, or maybe I'm only good at swimming at certain times. And I always slow down on the bike at this time, or I really struggle with the run when I get to this point. We sort of make a lot of assumptions about ourselves, and we also struggle with that because some of those assumptions are not true. For example, with a lot of women athletes, I see a lot of women who, hold themselves back. They don't push as hard as they can because they're within a group, or they're happy with their at, or they're just like, this is me and I love doing what I'm doing. And they may want to be faster, but they don't know if they can or can't be faster. So having data would show you that, hey, if this is what your test numbers are and this is where you're riding at or running at, there's a gap there. There's opportunity for you. Conversely, if I'm just going to continue stereotyping everybody on the team, on the guys' side, a lot of people sort of have a very, positive view of their abilities, and they may not be directly in correlation with what their actual physical capacity is. So most guys will overestimate what they're able to do. I rode last week's, intervals at 200 watts. This week I'm going to ride them at 250. Why not 50 more? Let's do it. If one is good, 50 is awesome. And in that case, people are not using data and they're making some really bad decisions about what they are, just based off sort of general assumptions or expectations. So having data allows you to make some really great decisions. And the most important part about it is that you need to collect the data at all times because you never know when you're going to need it. And this is the hard part, because people will come to me and say, hey, Coach Patrick, I want to be a better runner this year. And I say, great, well, what kind of runner were you last year? And they say, well, I was a pretty good runner. So I say, okay, well, how many miles a week did you run? They say, a lot. It was a lot of running. I said, well, I need to see some numbers. And they say, well, for the first 3 months of the year, I didn't track anything, and then I got injured, and so I wasn't exercising. But then I got back into it. Then my watch battery died, so I didn't do that for a while. And they could only show me 6 weeks. If you had 52 weeks of running last year, but you can only show me 6 weeks, there's not a whole lot I can do with that. That's like going to the doctor, telling your doctor something's wrong, but only letting them see your hand and nothing else. Something's wrong, my poop is yellow, but I'm only gonna let you see my hand. Go, what's wrong with me? How do I get better? It's not gonna work, right? And so all of that data is important. We take it, we aggregate it, you collect it, because when we do need to make a decision about training or racing, we can do something. And if we get enough data, we can actually start to find some corresponding points and learn a great deal about who you are. So if you're tracking no data, please start tracking some. If you track some, if you can track more, it's not too time costly or financially challenging, then please do so. Because at some point in time, you're going to come and ask me about racing and what you want to do. So a great another anecdote on this would be somebody who wants to get better at racing. They sign up for the team and they say, I did Ironman Louisville last year, or I did the Boston Marathon last year. This year I want to do it again, but I want to be 10 minutes faster, 15 minutes faster. Well, I want to see your race file. I want the number one thing I look at right away. Forget about training, forget about injury history, anything about your epidemiology, where you live, background, anything like that. Just show me a race file. I want to see a race file. Most people can't show me a race file. If they have a race file, a lot of those people don't have heart rate. They only have speed, which is not very helpful. Speed and elevation is that's not really telling me what's going on inside your body, the stresses you face, nutritional decisions, temperature on the day. I don't see any of that. And so having that contextual data helps us a lot. So for example, if I could see your race, let's just say you sign up for the team today and you tell me you want to be 15 minutes faster than last year's race in September, I could probably find you 15 minutes in that race without you actually training. I could just say, look, you're 15 minutes, it's already done. Check. Do these things next time that you race so you don't make those same mistakes. Don't do the first half marathon at world record pace. How about that? Or, when you're climbing hills, how about you don't go to 150% of threshold on those hills? Let's change those gears. You're good. Some of them are very simple changes, but some of them are not. And as you move down the spectrum of becoming more and more experienced, then the decisions become harder and they're more nuanced. And then the more data you have, the better we can be. Because remember, it happens on a continuum. So we make a decision at year 1, we implement it, we train, ride, run, race, swim, we come back, we look at the data, we analyze it, we make a decision, we go out for year 3, train, ride, race, run, and we keep going and we iterate. And all of that data continues to add up into that space. So to sum up this introductory section, if you have data, we can do something with it. If you're not collecting data, then you absolutely need to get started. Even if you don't use it, even if you put tape over your watch, I understand people need a break sometimes, that's fine, but just collect the data, because at some point in time, you're going to want to go back and see what happened. And if you don't have the information, then you are significantly limited in your ability to make great decisions moving forward. Every year, somebody freaks out about their race, about what their taper should be, etc. One of our very own Wicked Smart members told me a great tip a couple of years ago when I was freaking out about a taper for a big race. And that person said, well, what have you always done? Take a look at your own stuff. What happens in that regard? And I was all worried about looking at articles and what other people on the team do. I totally forgotten that I had 6 or 7 years of data, and I had good races and bad races, and I could use my own data to make a decision that works for me, proven over time, because I had that information. I was no longer stuck guessing or just stretching and trying to reach someone else's metrics. And that is something you will be able to do if we can nail down this data process right. Okay, so next step. Let's talk about choosing a log. Okay, I'm talking about different types of training logs. I say training logs because I'm thinking about where we want to aggregate your data. I'm not going to talk much about devices because I could easily go down a rabbit hole, but there are plenty of them from cycling to running to swimming, from watches to heart rate monitors to power meters. There's a variety of all sorts of things. You'll sort of encounter them as you see fit. As a bare minimum, I do recommend that people have a heart rate monitor that they can use at all places, and ideally a GPS watch that also gives you paces so we can see both pace and heart rate. That's fantastic. Beyond that, if you can get a power meter, that's great, and then you sort of move down the spectrum. But that's really it. We don't need a ton of information. We just need lots of it and recorded frequently. Okay. So talking about different types of training logs, the reason why I'm mentioning logs is that they're a place where your data becomes something, where it gets saved and where it becomes something, and both are very, very important. So where you put your data is a function of what you want to do with it. And there's a lot of different options out there. I'm going to talk about a few right now. You can choose the one that you want by all means, but you have to have somewhere for this data to go. So let's make sure we have that set up, okay? So most popular, I would say, is Garmin Connect. Usability is way low on Garmin Connect. It's not fun to use. It's not fun to research. It's not fun to look at stuff, but it does give you an opportunity of storing your data, putting it in a place, and then ultimately making it portable where you can take it out of there. Or if you want, Garmin Connect handshakes with a lot of other training logs. So my watch, which automatically goes to Garmin, I can set it so that it automatically goes to another training log as I want. I never have to, make that transition or anything like that, which makes the usage of your data down the road very, very useful. So Garmin Connect is the most popular, and most of you will have a Garmin Connect account just virtue of the technology that you have on your bike or on your wrist from running. Okay. Another popular one is Strava, which has both a free and premium level, and it's a very socially focused website. It's a place where you can upload your workouts and get, kudos and feedback from other people. You can join the Endurance Nation team on Strava, for example, or just meet other athletes in your area, see what routes they ride. It becomes very transparent, the type of work that you're doing, and it's a great resource to pull things together. The basic training log and information in there are pretty darn good. The visuals, I like them a lot. They're easy to use, the maps are great, and they connect with services like Relive, which will animate your workouts, which is pretty cool. And there's also plugins for Strava. In the Chrome internet browser, there's a plugin called Stravatistics. That's Strava with T-I-S-I-X at the end of it. T-I-S-T-I-X, sorry, statistics. And that plugin takes your page when you load Strava and will add a whole set of other data on top of it, which is pretty awesome to see what they're able to do. I can see all sorts of different metrics on segments, or I can see metrics on my training load, all sorts of great stuff in there as well. So that's another option to sort of enhance your Strava experience. Many of you will have Strava just for the social side, not necessarily for the log side, but if you do use it as a log, we have guidance inside the team of how you can make it open so that I can see your training log and be able to use that as a tool to give you advice and help as we move forward answering your questions across the course of the year. The next tier of training logs, and I'm not going to touch them all by any means, but here they are. Final Surge, which is something that will be more relevant to Endurance Nation members in the near future. They do a great job of making the training log into something that you can actually use and plan workouts, move workouts around, look at some data. It becomes much more accessible on a mobile app and so on. Another one is Runkeeper. I've not really used Runkeeper, but it's a similar play with workouts going into a box. You can plan ahead, you can analyze workout information, you can move things around, it syncs with most devices, things like that. Those are sort of like the next level of you're getting kind of a little serious, you can do that. Beyond that, we have sort of what I would consider the more deeper or more serious tools that are out there on the marketplace. A lot of people sort of naturally gravitate to these. You don't have to do that per se, but you do need to kind of think about what it means to use your data and how you're going to use it. So we have, in alphabetical order, we have Golden Cheetah, which is a desktop program that allows you to analyze your data and dive into that. We have Sport Tracks, which is a pretty robust system, been around for a while now, in terms of managing, manipulating your data. Again, getting that deeper analysis, not only on workouts, but across your season or periods of your season, and even having some predictive metrics in there for how to how today's workout will impact next week's, or how this week will impact your race. They've got some great pieces of technology in that area as well. And then finally, the elephant in the room would be Training Peaks, something that many of our members do use. They've been on the scene for forever, and they've had a pretty good platform. They've had hits and misses across the course of their history in terms of what makes workouts and things accessible to people. But it seems to be sort of the go-to place to put in your training data and then make charts, etc., off of it to understand more about who you are and how you're improving or not. Many of the graphs that I'll be showing you later on in this presentation will be based on Training Peaks. All of these partners, all of these programs have their pros and cons. At the end of the day, I really don't care where you store it. I want you to store it. Strava is easy. It's very cheap. It integrates with your Garmin. Things are pretty easy. You should be pretty good to go. Beyond that, it's kind of up to you and your budget and which one ultimately seems to work best for you. That's really what we want. We want something that you enjoy using and that you understand how to use. So even if, say, Training Peaks is the gold standard, if Runkeeper just seems more friendly to you, you should use it because you like it, right? So when you think about that, a lot of things that people get tied up with is their data. Where does my data live? How do I manage it? What do I do? Ultimately, at the end of the day, you control your data. And that's what's great about having a site like Garmin Connect, where all of your data will live. Even though you're not doing anything with it, it's stored there and retained there. And then you can use services. There's this one called Tapirrik, which is, I'll give you the link in the notes here, but it's Tapirrik. And it syncs all of your training data. That's our motto. And they'll sync any service to any other service. So you can go into Garmin Connect, for example, and say, I want to export all of these files to Training Peaks. Or I want to export all of these files to Runkeeper. Or I want to export all of this, Sport Track data. I want to put it somewhere else. So you can do it. And I think there's a one-time fee, maybe like $5. I don't even know. They have a service where you can ongoing make that transfer happen, but most services like Garmin and Strava, for example, have a handshake already in place where that just happens. You don't need to pay for that. But it is a great tool to move bulk workouts. So you can you can create a new training log, for example, and upload some stuff and just take a look at it, see what you like, see what moves around, what you want to do, and then if you do like it, you can go back to this Taperic website and say, you know what, I like this Runkeeper thing. Taperic, please go take all the stuff from from Garmin Connect and put it all in my Runkeeper from 2009 to today. Go. And 2 days later it comes back to you and all of your data has been moved over, and there you go, you've got your history, which is also very, very important. Okay, so pick your log, but definitely start off with something simple, something that's a no-brainer that just automatically pumps your workouts up there for you to look at in the future, and then you can start moving down the chain of which one you think is best for you. Again, most of our elite competitive athletes end up using Training Peaks as a tool, but that's not to say there aren't better tools out there, some of which I have mentioned to you today. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about collecting data. What's the most important part about collecting data? I'm not going to say read the manual because none of you read the manual. I think the most important part of collecting data, which is not on my list here, ironically, is charging your devices. You can't collect data if your watch is dead, if your heart rate monitor needs new battery, if your power meter's done, or your electronic shifting is out, or I have no idea what's going on. Taking care of those devices is important. So you want to have a space. For me, it's downstairs in the basement where I've got like a power strip and I've got all these plugs and doodads laid out on a table, so I can just charge my devices. I can pick them up and go work out, come back and put them down, and I'm done. I'm not leaving it in the kitchen or leaving it on the counter or putting it on a windowsill, and then I say, can't find my watch, can't find my computer, it's not charged wherever it is, etc. So try and set that stuff up for you so you're very straightforward and you know where it always is and you can manage it and so on. Okay, super easy, super important. That's the worst when you can't capture that workout, right? Because it didn't happen, right? I didn't see it on Strava. Didn't happen. Sorry. Just kidding. So, okay, so the 4 points about collecting data that are super important. Number one, you need appropriate zones. This is super important. A lot of the analyses that training programs are going to do, especially the medium and more advanced tier websites, the training logs, are going to do is give you feedback on the work that you just did. If you ran 5 miles and you ran it at 10-minute miles, for some people that may be very easy. For other people that may be very challenging. How do we know the difference? Well, you need zones in there so that the workout program knows, wow, your heart, your threshold pace is 10-minute miles. If you did 5 miles at 10-minute pace, then you were crushing it for 5 miles, which is legit. It's almost an hour threshold pace. That's a high number. That's a high intensity workout. That would be reflected in the data only if you enter those training zones. So much like you do inside Endurance Nation, we want you to also make sure you've got updated zones inside these workout platforms. They usually have very straightforward tools or calculators to help you adjust. Most of the time, if you're familiar with your fitness zones, you can back your way into the numbers using whatever calculators they have. Endurance Nation's training zones are, sort of by definition, a little different than what you'll see out there in the marketplace. So you'll have to kind of work with that calculator on that website or tool that you do choose to make sure you choose the right zones or set those right zones in place. It's super important. Okay. And then you want to update those zones as you go across the year, because what was a very hard run in February, by the time you get to June, may not be a hard run for you at all because you've changed your zones, you've lost some weight, you're fitter, etc. So it's really important that you monitor those core metrics, things like your body composition, but also if your swim, bike, or run fitness does change, you want to put those in there. Good news for old people like me, those zones don't change so much over time anymore. They're kind of always the same, so that does become a little bit easier for you. Okay. The next piece about collecting data that's important is manual entry. A lot of times your workouts are not captured. Sometimes one computer doesn't talk to another, or maybe you're running indoors and your watch doesn't record it, so now you did 5 miles on a treadmill but nobody knows about it, or maybe a workout didn't save, or whatever the reason may be. We need to also make sure you're comfortable manually entering those workouts so we can have that data. If you tell me you run 5 times a week, but 3 of those runs are indoors on a treadmill and you don't track it because it's a treadmill and you can't track it, etc., that's a problem because I'm missing out on a huge ton, like 2/3 of your total performance. That's terrible. I need to know that number. Even if it's not great, even if you just said treadmill 6 miles and you put in the pace, the time and the distance, the calculator, they'll throw out the pace for you. If you have a heart rate number, great. If you don't worry about it and you're done. That's it. But manually entering all those workouts becomes really important because, again, we want that total picture. Like, do you need to manually enter that you did 10 push-ups today? That's really up to you. I don't see the upside of that. But I do see those sort of main aerobic workouts as super important. Other people like to track sleep. Sometimes you can have other things that kind of get integrated into your training log, again, depending on the log and what you're hoping to do. All of those pieces are there. But in general, the manual entry becomes really important just so you get a sense of where you're at. And again, it's very powerful to be entering that information in. It sort of hits home for you at 5 miles at this pace, and it starts to make it more real for you when you're entering those numbers. Okay. The next piece of collecting data is about auto uploading. Ideally, you've got things set up so that your computer will automatically, through Bluetooth, push up. And so all of my computers are Garmin, except for my Wahoo bike computer, which I wonder where the hell that thing is these days. So when I'm done with a workout, it automatically gets pushed to Garmin through Bluetooth. It syncs, and then it will go to wherever else I want it to go. In my case, I've connected my Garmin account with both Strava for the social side as well as Training Peaks for the data side. So when I do a run and I hit done, boom, that stuff just goes off and it goes right to all those websites. So I can literally finish a ride behind my house, hit stop and save on my bike computer. By the time I get to the garage, wipe my bike down and come upstairs for my recovery shake because I'm so good with nutrition. Boom, there you go, there's my workout. I'm already getting like thumbs up on my Strava feed and I'm all set. So that's awesome, right? Because you just want to know it was captured and it's good. You can always go back and look at it later, but you definitely want that stuff done. So make sure that auto uploading is set, connected and working for you is super important. It just takes a lot of the stress off and allows you to move forward, right? And who doesn't want to look at the workout right after the workout's done? You want to make sure you're on track for the rest of your week. You have to make adjustments. What have you learned? All of that's right there, okay? The final piece here in collecting data is about correcting data. So sometimes the data that you do pull in isn't right. It could be missing some sections. In my case, I've got this terrible elevation issue with my Garmin 920. Always says I'm running at 90,000 feet or something like that. So as you go through your data, you'll see sometimes information's bad. There was a spike in your power meter, or in my case, I've got this elevation issue. You can edit workouts to remove that data. So when you're looking at your data, you see a huge, if you've got a swim chart and all of your swim weeks are super tiny along the bottom, but there's one swim week where you did like 90,000 yards, then you can click on that, go back in your log, etc., and find that thing, and you can delete it or edit it. So it gives the chart will give you better data and see overall. In my case, the issue with the runs is I'll go do a run at a nice easy pace, but because my watch says that I went up and down for 45,000 feet in those 5 miles, it gives me this insane suffer score, which I did not earn. So I have to go back in and edit those workouts, and most of the logs will have a correction button or a way to fix it, so you can get that in there. But do pay attention to the data. You want it to be accurate. Things will not always be exactly accurate. Like, will your speed on a treadmill exactly reflect the speed that you would normally have outside? Probably not. But it's pretty close. If it's close enough, I'll take it. If it's off by 2 miles an hour, then we got an issue. But the last thing I want to have happen is that you lose part of your life to looking online for manuals or reading actual manuals or trying to figure out how to make some dang thing work. Definitely go in and ask people in the Power and Pace forum where a lot of our tech geeks hang out. Hopefully many of them can help you in terms of getting these things set up. Or as always, please use your friend Google to help you, because there's great videos and help resources out there as well. Okay? All right, so this ends the talking head portion of this video. I hope you understand the importance of collecting data. You are on board with collecting data. You know that at the very minimum, you need a heart rate monitor. Beyond that, you ideally have something like a GPS watch that allows you to capture some speed, distance, elevation stuff. Likely it will also show you cadence if you get that with the heart rate monitor. And then eventually you can move down the line to having power meters, first for the bike and perhaps later on for the run or even the swim, depending on what your budget looks like. You don't need all the data to be awesome, but you do need a fair amount of it. And the longer period you have that data, the more valuable it becomes. Okay, think of like compound interest or information for you. Okay, we talked about different types of training logs and how Garmin or Strava are kind of default options that are very easy to set up just to start aggregating stuff. You can join Team Endurance Nation on Strava, so you can check that out. That information is in resources/wiki on Strava. And then we talked about collecting data, the importance of zones, how you can enter your own workouts and why you want to as needed, how to set up the auto uploading, and then finally making sure that your data is correct if you need to. In this second half, I will be going through some critical charts for swim, bike, and run. I'll talk a little bit about overall training logs, and then I'll talk specifically about analyzing individual workouts just so you get a sense for what we're looking for. Okay, so thanks so much for tuning in. I will see you in the second half of this video. See you guys. Okay, folks, I'm going to dive into the swim chart section for you in today's talk. So we'll kind of head into there, and I apologize for this awkward camera angle. All right, I'm in my Training Peaks account. I've got in the dashboard section, I've got all sorts of charts up here. So we're going to head down and take a look at the swim charts that I have set up. So I have a couple swim charts here. I've got swim volume, swim cadence, and then peak power for the swim as well. So I do have a power meter with my Vasa. Okay, so first and foremost, we have this weekly swim volume chart. This is a big long-term view. I've set this up for long-term. When I'm in training, I actually make it a much smaller window, or I might have two charts, one longer, one shorter. But this kind of gives you a sense of my swimming, right? I was injured here in the middle of this year, so I didn't do a lot of swimming. When I got back into racing this year and I had my Vasa, I did a lot of swimming. In fact, a lot more swimming than I've ever done in the past. But very helpful for me to go back and say, well, what's my expectations? Or when I was successful in my last race, what did that swim look like? If I had a good race back in October of 2015, for Kona, what did I do? I swam 12,000. The week before I swam 17,000. What do those weeks look like? Looks like I put together about 8 weeks of decent mileage, somewhere in the 10K range. But as you can tell, I've never swum a ton until getting into some more of these bigger spikes this year. So this is a useful chart for me because I think a lot of people need compliance help with their swim. When we're being successful at the swim in building up for a half or an Ironman, we need to have several weeks of consistent swim volume to really kind of see a delta. There's not a lot of training stress associated with swimming. It's not a very costly activity aside from time. But we do need some consistency here because a good swim or good swim fitness reduces the cost of the work you'll be doing in the swim and makes you successful. So you're going to have a number that you want to look at. So I can come in here and say, for example, I'm going to say, what are my dates? Well, let's just say I was looking at last year, and I could say, I'm going to look at July last year through, let's just call it custom date. This says custom date through today, so we'll just let that be. We'll say, okay, apply, close. All right, so obviously I'm not swimming right now in the winter, but here you go. You can see the different builds to Tremblant, then my build to Kona, and then my quick build turnaround to Cabo, and get a sense for where it is, right? So over, these weeks are kind of skewing it, but in general, my average yardage is somewhere in sort of that 10,000 yard range. So I know if I want to be there, I can set this target up for me and I can see it here. I can follow my progress across the course of the weeks, expecting to see some work and some non-work. But I'll also expect to see, depending on the time of year, also no swimming. Like right now, I'm not swimming at all. I'm not worried about swimming. I'm not thinking about swimming. And so from a chart perspective, this is important to help me make decisions about what type of swim training I want to get myself to, so I can plan ahead for that. And then also to keep myself on track with my training as well, just to make sure these numbers do look consistent. And if I've got a drop in one of these bars, what happened, why? Is that on purpose or not? Was I sick? And it gives me a sense of, if I'm missing some volume from a week, can I put it back in a later week somehow? What does that look like? And again, I like to go back and take a look at race performance and see, what was my swim like in that race relative to the swimming I did before? What does that look like? So I think this is a good chart, okay? The next chart that I recommend looking at is a swim cadence comparison. In this case, swim cadence, if you are wearing a GPS watch or a sport-enabled watch, you can likely get some kind of swim cadence off of it. And when we swim early season versus in season, there's typically a change in the pace that you're looking at. And you can get some of that from your laps or when you look at them, but most of the time I end up putting that into my notes. I'll have a key set like 5x200. And this time I did it at this speed, but last time I did it at that speed. A lot of that's captured in the actual workout information specific to that. Like for example, if I were to pull up a workout here, I don't know if I can do it from this chart. I don't think I can. But if I pull up a swim workout, it would show that in the title what I did very clearly, right? So I know what I did. But the swim cadence, when we move in season, we're typically moving from swimming with technique to swimming with intent, swimming at race pace. And there should be a cadence change there. You should be a faster swimmer working harder later in the year. So you can set up a comparison where I said, okay, what was I early in the year 2017? and what was I later, okay? So you can see that, later in the year, I was doing a minute. I could hold about 57 was my average, whereas before it was 51. Kind of across the board, 58, 52. I was about 6 strokes higher across the board, except for the longer ones. I was 53 to 46, so 7 strokes longer here. So ultimately, even a bigger delta at the end. This chart lets me know that my in-season swimming is different than my early season swimming. And I can see what those numbers look like over time. Better swimming for advanced swimmers is about having a higher stroke rate, a higher turnover. This chart allows me to see that, so I enjoy looking at this chart. Many people get away with just the volume, but I also like this cadence comparison chart, okay? And then down here for the swim, looking at peak power. Again, this is a peak power chart in Training Peaks here from the sidebar, but it's very similar to that comparison because I can set up a comparison window. And again, what I did this was what did the first half of the year, like mostly through Tremblant, look like versus the swimming that I did after Tremblant. How was it different? So depending on the time of year that I'm in, I will set up a different chart for different parameters. So I might be looking at a race build versus this race build. I could be looking at early season last year to early season this year. You can really get kind of nuanced with it. But I wanted to kind of give you a comparison within the course of a year so you could see. So when we kind of look at this chart, you can see, let me zoom in on it, if it lets me do it. Okay, so we'll see my 30-second swim power in November was 97 seconds, but in May, 97 watts, but it was only 74 watts. You can really see that as I did more interval work and consistent work, I saw gains that went all the way out to 30 minutes and an hour. So I was 83 watts, whereas early in the year I was at 58. I was 53 watts super early, and later on I was at 81. So this is a chance for me to see that, yeah, wow, I did make a significant delta in my swim power, my swim strength. Again, this is not a daily chart I go back and refer to. It's probably more of a monthly. I focus on hitting my workouts. Workouts are written as they're intended. I do them as they're written, which is how it was intended to be. And then come and look at this chart and be like, well, hey, are my numbers changing like this month versus all the months prior? I can set those parameters in the chart. I could say, January 1st through, September 16th, and then I'll do the comparison and say, 9/17 to today, for example, like that. And I'll say like that. And that'll show me my different numbers. So it'll show me all of the time into up into through Tremblant into Kona, and then my final push. And you can see that once I was sort of peaking and getting into Kona, I was still able to eke a little bit more performance out there, going from 89 to 94 watts. So I was still improving my swim. So again, useful for me moving forward as a planning tool, not a daily tool, but nice to see from a power perspective that my numbers are improving across the course of the year, and that's sort of motivational for me now, but also moving forward, a good goal for me. Hey, I should still have 5 or 6 more watts the next time I get around to this time of the year next year to improve. Okay, all right. Hopefully that was helpful for you on the swim side. There's not a ton of stuff we do with charts on the swim side, but I'll be back in a short minute here with some information for you on the run. See ya. Okay, kids, now we're going to head over and take a look at some of these run charts. I don't know why I put run second, but here we are. We're doing some run charts. Let's do it. I think the run charts are some of the most important charts that we have for keeping ourselves healthy and for also eking out, performance and being smart from a planning perspective. There's several different run charts that I like to use. The first is distance by week run here. So I'll pull this up. This is a chart, and I kept it short here from last year to today on sort of what my weekly average of running was. And this is a helpful tool. We use a lot of this in the winter for run durability planning. We say, hey, last year, what was your weekly average mileage last year? Well, if you take out sort of these points here, probably let's call it 18 miles. 18 miles is kind of my average. That's my happy place. I should be able to run 18 miles a week fairly easily. You can see I did not do that. In fact, there were many weeks early in the year where I was underperforming. So there's opportunity in here for me to add some volume, and also spaces where I know I can only spend so much time above that average weekly volume. And power user tip for you guys is that I want to see usually a 50-50 split. If this is your average, then you can spend just about as much time above that average as you spend below that average. If you kind of were to shuffle these around or cut and paste and whatever, it's probably pretty close to what that looks like, because that's a pretty common training approach, which is consistent running, lower volume running, healthy running, followed by a push-up to some bigger volume. This is what you would typically see with a race build. For many people who are participating in run challenges or doing consistent running or doing 30, 40 miles a week for forever, it's important to note, just by looking at this chart, I don't do that. Like, I can still be fast and not be running 40 miles a week. So you also don't need to run 40 miles a week to be fast. But more importantly, if you're running that consistently for that long, that's a fundamentally different cost level to your body than a variety in terms of your running volume. So important to be kind of mindful of that. So this chart, again, great for me in terms of a planning perspective. What did I do last time? What can I do this time? I know that I kind of peaked out, let's see, at 40 miles in these 2 weeks, but the confidence builder for me was, hey, I was kind of sitting at like 18 miles a week, 20 miles a week early on. And when I wanted to go to Tremblant, which was here, I did, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I did 10 weeks of consistent running into Tremblant and still did well, right? I was able to back that up a little more strategically with some, easy weeks, volume week, easy week, and so on. A better pattern emerges here. And then heading into Cabo as well. So, and you can see my focus on run durability, except for vacation, which has been crushing me a little bit. I've been pretty consistent with that as well. So this is a great training tool for you as well. Hey, like 40 miles is kind of my peak. What do I look at, et cetera? And so I like to watch this chart unfold, but I also like to use it from a planning perspective. Okay. Next chart you can have is this average weekly run volume. And this just kind of takes, this is your distance by week. This is average weekly run volume. And this is the similar chart. I just made it into a bigger window. So last year, it's, sort of aggregate. And I like to have this chart just for all of my run time. Like, I go back as far as I can. I could probably go back to 2011 maybe. You get a better sense. And in fact, ironically, that run volume is still 18.6, very similar to what I'd done in that past year as well, despite all the volume. And again, you see different builds and recovery periods, different cycles as I go through. You can see something that's got like a, sort of a multi-Ironman year versus a single Ironman year, and what that looks like. Again, just a very sort of useful tool to have in your back pocket from a planning perspective. When people say, last year my run was bad, I want to run fast like I did 2 years ago. What does it look like? You can come to a chart like this and dive in there and take a real good look at it. You can see what the numbers looked like in these weeks and why. I did these 3 weeks here in April heading into Texas. That were some pretty big miles. Well, how did that pay off for me? What did some of those key workouts look like? I can use this as a chart. Not as important, more from a planning perspective than training, but always good to have that in your back pocket. Okay. Another chart that I like to look at is Run TSS. Run TSS. TSS is your training stress score, which is a concept coined by Training Peaks, but people have different versions of what that means. But basically, there's a cost associated with your workout based off of your threshold levels, and then the intensity at which you work out and the time for it. So generally speaking, if 50% of my threshold, that's 0.5, right, or half, I square 0.5, so I make that 0.25, and I multiply that by, an hour, then I've earned 25 TSS by 100 for the hour. I've earned 25 TSS for an hour at 50% of my threshold. That gives me a number. So it's a way to quantify the work that you're doing. And so I like to run TSS, and I'll look at this separately just to kind of see where everything kind of plays out for me from a stress standpoint. This will map closely to your volume for the most part, especially if you're doing the run durability program. But again, this lets me see like, hey, I was able to put together 5 decent weeks kind of in a 210 TSS zone. That's fantastic. And I'm slowly kind of trying to build myself back up to this mean as part of my reintegration process. This becomes a great tool in season for making sure that you're not only knowing what your target is, but also how to get to it or get back to it as you go forward. So you can see a couple weeks here to build up to it, a recovery, and then 5 weeks at it, and then recovery, and now go back to it hopefully for a little bit of a longer period, and so on. And this chart becomes super important as you think about like, how do I manage all of my training? So if we go, way back, this will jam up the chart quite a bit. So I don't have data for that early stuff, but you can get a sense of what this looks like overall, where the training stress has played out, and so on. So all this run durability stuff that I'm doing right now, this period of time in this sort of 200 TSS range, there are many times early in the year where I was not hitting those numbers, right? This year I was good at it. This next year I was not good at it. This subsequent year, I was a little bit better at it. And this is when I went crazy with my run volume and got injured, and then I had all this injury time. So you can see I really overachieved here at a time when I shouldn't have been. 503 TSS was more than I'd done for most of my Ironman races, and was in the winter time. So I really had done a number on myself. So the run TSS by week can be an important tool in a short-term window. And it's also nice to look at long-term wise, again, just to make sure to understand what your body can handle, what that load looks like. So I'm a huge fan of looking at that chart as well. And then finally, little run cadence comparison as well. I don't have a lot of great data here to show you because I haven't been running a lot lately. I've been running on a treadmill. It's been pretty boxy. But maybe I can go back here. Let me set this to a different date range. Let's say it's from, let's say 9/1/2015 to 3/1/2016. And then we'll do custom dates. We'll say, bear with me, 3/22/16 to 10/22/16. Let's just see. I don't even know what happened during that point in time, but let's see what that looks like. So that'll pull up some different ranges for me. So I can see the gray is the earlier time frame, the yellow is later. So this would be, the gray would be kind of winter, early season training in terms of like speed and things that I'm doing, and then the yellow will be sort of like that later time, like end of season, out season, and so on. So you can see that when I'm running later in the year, my cadence is definitely lower. I'm not doing these interval type runs. It tends to be more consistent, but then my cadence does overlap quite a bit between racing and training at the end of the day at that longer hour mark. This is a useful tool for me, and it's something that I may look at on a more micro level, especially if I'm moving into a phase of my training between training plans, or I'm doing something like a run focus block, or I am adding more run intensity, or I've got a key run workout with intensity on it that I want to track. I'll be looking for that type of work in that phase to be substantially different than what I've done before or after, and I'd like to see a change in that cadence. Sometimes it's hard to see it in an individual workout, but these trend charts can help you see just how well you're doing. It also gives you a good marker of where things work. If you're kind of always sitting at 88 RPM overall from your data, well, how does that map to what your race day expectations are? Are you okay with that? Are you not? Is it something you want to improve? Then you can set that as a target and come back and take a look at it. So this becomes more of a bigger picture, sort of retrospective tool that I like to use to see if I am in fact, making speed changes or performance changes related simply on cadence. Up and down with the cadence is generally reflective of other positive or negative changes in your training without having to dive down the rabbit hole of having a power meter and looking at vertical oscillation and ground contact time and all sorts of stuff that can get a little crazy for you guys. Okay, so there we go. That is your run cadence chart comparison and all of your charts for you there. All right, I'll be back in a minute. In just a second, I'll have some stuff for you guys on the next set of charts, which I'm excited about. I'm going to talk a little bit about the bike and give you some insight on some of these bike charts as well. Okay, see ya. All right, everybody, let's talk about bikes. Not a ton of charts here, outside of what I would normally see in like a season chart, your performance manager chart, but important charts nonetheless. I want to talk to you about these two charts, kind of get you up to speed about what I recommend you look at and when we want you to look at it here on the bike. So first and foremost, we have a weekly bike mileage chart. Again, this is more goal oriented, and some logs like Strava will let you just kind of set a weekly target, or Zwift lets you set a weekly distance target. This is just great to make sure that you're adhering to stuff. A lot of times when I see people who underperform, I didn't mention on the bike, but certainly on the run, but certainly on the bike as well. People will say they're not that fast on the bike, and when I go back and look at their weekly bike mileage, it's significantly less than the event that they're taking part in. If your race is 112 miles, but your weekly mileage for the last 3 months is like 80 miles a week, you're not nearly prepared. And that's just sort of an easy, green light, red light situation with your data. But this can also be a helpful tool as well. This is a short-term look at the stuff I'm doing now. So in short term, you may want to see like, okay, what are my goals for this training block? Am I above or at them? Where am I in general? In this case, you can see that I was building my bike early in this year. Took a break and then came back, kind of hit 4 big weeks, took another break, and now I'm kind of back at it. What does that look like? Where am I in kind of relation to the other stuff that I've done? This is, some significant training changes for me. and gives me a sense of how that maps out, like how significant is it. Well, zooming out and taking a look at this really shows me that, you know, kind of this block of training I've done here post Cabo through July, which has really been, you know, 12 weeks now so far, significantly higher. You know, if we just draw a line across the board here compared to what I've normally done, you know, I've done, you know, 10 weeks at or above this kind of point in this last block, but compared to all the other training I've done before, rarely spent this much time in this zone from the bike. So it's a helpful tool for me to kind of understand the fatigue that I'm feeling and where I'm at, but it also gives me a marker for like, hey, what was some of the work that I did, again, heading into those races? When were the big weeks? How do they play out? How much rest did I take after a big week? How much time did I need, etc.? You know, and typically you can see that these higher peaks are followed by rest periods as well. And sometimes if you have a bike and run chart, you'd see that the bike volume drops down while the run volume picks up, for example, as well. So again, great historical tool, or short-term wise, kind of a motivational goal for you. Now, from a training perspective, I mentioned this earlier with the training stress. Also important, this is the cost, the actual work that you're doing when you're on the bike. So forget about the distance and interval workouts. Obviously, they happen sort of at different times of your season. You'll be doing a lot of intensity in the winter, but a lot more endurance or volume in the summer, unless you're only doing short course racing. As such, you'll see different varieties, I guess, in terms of how things play out. So there's times of year when your training stress is low, like for example, you know, in March, say, but my intensity factor was actually quite high for that low volume, or in here as well. Lots of high intensity factors for very low volume as I'm doing good work in very short periods of time, right? As the volume goes up, some of those intensity factors start to drop over time as well. So you'll see, you know, winter training or intensity training versus volume training, things vary greatly, or rather, they don't increase at that same rate. If this were to increase 4 times, this does not increase 4 times. This only increases like 1/4 of the time, just because of how things evolve over time. So for me, again, this is a great planning tool. You know, as you move down the athlete spectrum, you move from thinking about just mileage to also just training stress. Like, what's the load I'm trying to put on my body so that I can force adaptation so I can be faster on race day? Well, what does that load look like? You know, in the past, you know, it would look like I've kind of spent a lot of time here in this kind of 500 TSS range, you know, above it for some peak elements, but kind of at it or just below it for most races. And then you come in and look at this last block, and I spent, you know, 12 weeks kind of in the almost 700 TSS range, significantly greater than what I've done in the past. That's, you know, a success for me in terms of pushing myself on the bike, but also a warning sign that I have to be very smart and, you know, kind of not overcook myself. So I like to see this sort of as a record. So I had a target for TSS, something I'm trying to earn each week, and I'm just trying to sit on that number. Again, in-workout metrics are typically more important for bike, particularly when we get to like race execution or race simulation. But overall, these 2 charts I think are very, very useful, both, you know, long-term and short-term. You know, you can just say, you know, how do things look for me as I'm sort of planning out my year, and what does this training block look like? How successful am I? High week, low week, what does that mean? You get a lot of nuance out of that, and generally very important. So something else that I generally take a look at, aside from just looking at distance, as you move down the spectrum and get a little more geeky about what you're doing, definitely take a look at the training stress and make sure that you're seeing a change commensurate with the work you're doing, whether it's shorter work in the winter that's higher intensity, or volume work when the weather's nicer that's a little more steady. Super important to kind of keep your eye on the ball and make sure we're challenging your system enough and not over challenging it when it needs to recover as well. Okay, awesome. All right, so that said, I do want to head over and talk to you a little bit about Training Peaks Performance Manager chart. I could probably spend a week talking about that chart. I'm not going to go super crazy about it, but I do want to give you some parameters and some understandings about how to set it up. And then I'll link you to a video on how you can, you know, dive in a little more deeply, and your teammates can probably fill in some of those elements as well. Before I move on to talk a little bit about taking a look at some trends by discipline, and then finally analyzing some individual workouts. Okay? All right, onwards. Okay, so let's talk about this performance manager chart. What is it? How do we use it? What does it look like? You know, any chart is only as good as the data we put into it and the consistency of that data. Other services have a similar tool to kind of give you a sense of stress and load, and you can start to notice trends and decide this is an opportunity for more work, or I need more rest, or whatever that may be. In this case, I'm going to be looking at Training Peaks Performance Manager chart, just so you kind of get a sense for how we want you to lay things out. Okay. So I'm going to expand this chart. And this is obviously something I'll do overall is I'll look at a big chart, and this is all the way from 2013 out season through today as a sense of work, and it's generally customized. So I've got all sports in here. Training Peaks lets you set parameters. I leave these the same, basically the chronic training load or the long training load. I leave that at 42 days. That's that blue line. The fatigue, the short stuff, that's the 7 days. That's the sort of shows the effect of shorter or more intense workouts. These are the pink areas. And then we have training stress balance, which is this yellow section, which shows you when you're rested and when you're not rested. So it works inverse to what you see on the blue and pink charts in terms of how your body can handle those. The more work you do, the lower your training stress balance goes, and the more you need for recovery, and so on. Okay. I do have right now showing intensity factor and TSS on the chart. So let's talk about the macro stuff and work our way down. So what do we see here? So we do have this intensity factor here, and this is, what does it mean to go super hard in a workout? That's probably an outlier workout of some kind, but that lets me see that generally speaking, for example, you can see the trends here, that when I'm in the wintertime, I've got a lot of sort of these higher intensity workouts, but when I move in season, the intensity generally drops down here lower, right? Let me take away the red dots so we can just see the blue. So you see they'll drop in season and they'll come up. So as depending on the time of year and the work that I'm doing, you'll see this intensity factor dive around. Or when I was injured, etc., a lot of the intensity factors were low. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward stuff. The training stress number, that shows you some of the data from the other chart, which is just how hard was that individual workout, what did it look like. And you can again see some outlier training sessions and some others, and it's sort of general variety of how the work works. I'm not too worried about those sessions or those sections of this report. What I'm really interested in is getting a sense of the flow of my training and where I'm at. And so again, you have the training stress balance here, which is sort of like how your body's feeling. You've got the acute training load, like how does the work in the last couple of days matter to you, which is usually exponentially higher than the long-term effect of quality training, which is the blue fill in. Let me fill in the form fill, because I appreciate that much better when I can see that yellow as a whole. So what's great about this kind of stuff is I can really start to dive in and say, okay, hey, my chronic my CTL was up at 140 earlier on. Well, again, I come over here and say, wow, I've only been above 140 twice in my life otherwise, and even including other Ironman bills and things like that, I never got this high in terms of my fatigue. So I can see sort of a general trend of the work that I'm doing here, and again, makes sense why I'm a little more tired than most years that I've been in the past. But it's also a useful tool to kind of be a little more specific and say, like, hey, how am I doing with my training and stuff like that. So let's put on, we're gonna go back a little bit. So this goes back to June of 2017 as I was kind of ramping up the first time for Tremblant, and then Kona, and then Cabo. So interestingly enough, you can see that the work that I'm doing now is actually more work than I did heading into any of my Ironman races this year. So another indicator of sort of fatigue and how I'm managing it and heading into it. But from a planning perspective, this gives me a good sense of sort of what my training load target might want to look like overall. That's across swim, bike, and run. And I can also see what some of these bigger hit out sessions were like and when they were, 9/17, about a month out before the big race, in Hawaii. So I get a chance to kind of see how hard I need to go or how hard I've gone in the past and decide if I want to go that hard again. Commensurately, people spend a lot of time looking at this blue line and making sure that it's moving up. Generally speaking, if you're continuing your workload, it will move up. The further you zoom in or out, the smoother or more raggedy this line looks. But generally speaking, as you move in the winter, this inclines a little bit slower because a lot of the workouts are fixed at time, so you're not going to see a big delta in training stress. But as we head in season, the weather gets nicer and we start to pick up the ropes, you will see this general upward trend, and that's fantastic. So things to note about this in this particular chart, this build for me, much higher than it was before, but also much more sustainable. this is a, almost a 4-month build here, relative to what I've done in the past and where I've been. So I'm very excited to see how this pans out in terms of overall performance, but very helpful for me to see that. You never want to get like, sometimes people really struggle with this chart. They get stuck in the numbers and they're a slave to these numbers. Don't be. This is sort of a representation of the work that you did. So don't get down about how things look bad because of the work you did. That puts you in a position where you're doing work just so your chart looks good, and that's not why we're here. We're doing work so that we're fast, we're healthy, we're fit, we're getting stronger, and that may not always be reflected in this chart, which sometimes people will chase. So important to have this set up, and important to be able to look at this information again from a planning perspective, making sure that you're on point, feeling good about the work that you're doing, but also being able to go back sort of retroactively and say, oh, where was I at ski time? Oh, I had this, 8-mile run, or this, whatever it is. And we can kind of dive that stuff in and, dig it up and figure out what we're going to do to help you make good decisions and kind of keep you on track. So there's more information about the Performance Manager chart that I will give you moving forward. But overall, I hope you kind of get a general sense of how it works and how we want to see the trends, both in the wintertime, which is a little more less of a ramp, and then in season where things do pick up quite a bit over time, and then ideally, kind of level off as you get used to the training load. These are the kind of charts that really let you see, am I in a good place? Am I in a bad place? Am I doing work to myself that's going to hurt me at the end of the day, or what? Otherwise, just you're making decisions off of every day. Should I or should I not run? Well, it sounds like you should, because not running isn't bad, right? But then you look at your chart and see your fatigue and see your chronic training load, and you're saying to yourself, you know what? I think I need a day off right now so I can come back stronger tomorrow. So, being good and on top of that is super important as well. Okay, we'll be back in a little bit with some individual workout analyses. All right, kids, time to talk about analyzing some individual files. This is a little, I'll do my best to kind of give you as much information as I can, but I do understand that it can be, confusing or maybe hard to look at. So first and foremost, let's dive into, I'll pull up my chart here. We'll dive into a long bike, which I do not have prepared. So we're going to go to calendar, and my calendar's here. And I'll go back to, let's say, October, September, somewhere in there. I was doing some longer rides. Here's a long ride that I did. Hopefully this is not the one where I lost all my power and stuff like that. Let's analyze this workout. This is a mega workout I did. This is my ride around Rhode Island. Okay, great. So in this case, this is sort of like a longer ride I did. It wasn't an intensity related ride, but I have a chance to kind of dive in here and see where things are at. I'm going to, when I look at analyzing a long ride, first thing I look at, because I'm sort of constrained by my window here, first thing I look at here is these general metrics. Because I'll know from the get-go, hey, what was my target wattage that I was trying to hit? Normally we look at the normalized power for outside. And what was my intensity factor? So for a long ride, 70, between 70 and 75% of your threshold is a great place to be. Because it's not a race-specific ride, I'm not worried about the variability. But that's generally what I'm looking for. Then what kind of heart rate did I see? So you can see it's a pretty low heart rate. I wasn't working super hard this whole time. It was meant to be sort of a long ride, okay? So those, I usually generally start on this side of the equation. Then I move into the actual file itself, and I say, what's some of the stuff that I see here? So let me see if I can make this look a little bit bigger as I pull it over here. Not too big here. All right, so then I'll come in and take a look at some of the files here and say, all right, well, how did things play out? What did my heart rate look like as well? You can see that, depending on the terrain or where I was, or taking a break, how my heart rate went up and down. Remember, you can always, sort of hide that information from your chart as much as you want. Generally speaking, I don't look a lot at the temperature stuff unless it's a particularly hot race. And in a bike workout, I'm never really worried about miles per hour, so I hide that as well. Instead, I'm generally looking at my cadence, my watts, and my heart rate. So let's put the heart rate back on the scale here. And often I'll hide the cadence as well, unless you've got some sort of cadence-related issue I'm not sure about. So this is what we generally look at. And so what we're looking at for here, where in general, what my overall heart rate trend was like, and you can do some smoothing here with this bar to kind of give you a sense of, makes it look a lot cleaner, like, oh, what were my general trends like across this whole workout? In general, I was working harder at the end than the beginning, which is something I look for in all my endurance workouts. And key critical areas are, we can see when the effort goes up, the heart rate goes up. What we're looking for is areas where the heart rate goes up, but the power does not. And this is a key section of it here. Heart rate's going up, but power is not. And in fact, power starts to drop a little bit down here, but heart rate does not. So you can tell pretty much from heading in the 6-hour mark on, I was pretty fatigued and where things went from there. Okay, let's pull up a different file here. Let me go back further to find a race file just to give you a sense of what that was like. See if I can find Tremblant. Here we go. Give it a second here, because I'll also kind of dive into the numbers for a race as well. So again, I usually start on the side and say for a race file, I'm looking at what my TSS is. I have a target for my TSS in general, and this lets me know where I was. It's a little bit on the higher end for me. I've got an IF number that I'm chasing, and then a normalized power number with a heart rate. So again, those 4 numbers are important, but within a race scenario, very different. I want my VI to be low. I want my power to be consistent. I want my heart rate to be, about 10 beats below where I want it to actually end up on the run. And I've got this TSS target, all of which you can find in our race section, but which is located here. And then I come in here and take a look at my overall file. So again, I'm going to hide the cadence. I'm going to hide the temperature. I don't really care about that. I'm going to hide the miles per hour. Should be a way you can sort of permanently select those things. So all I'm left with now is the heart rate in the watts and the elevation, so you can see how it lays out. So in this case, because it's a race workout or race simulation workout, what I'm looking for is, having my heart rate come down out of transition. Where does it drop out? Which seems like it sort of bottoms out in general here by about the 40-minute mark. And then I want to basically see that heart rate build across the rest of the day or stay steady. In this case, it does more staying steady. I definitely rode hard through that first loop, and then second loop, I said, I'm going to make a decision here and dial it back. And you can see the watts are a little bit lower here than they were in the other areas of the race. And a lot of coasting early on in the race as I was dealing with traffic and things like that, but a lot of opportunities to be much steadier as the day went on when I had less people around me. Okay, so what we're looking for from an overall race file, something of a 2.5 or longer hour-long session. Again, that heart rate continues to go up, and you're feeling good in that, particularly through the end of your ride, and that your watts also stay good. It's not uncommon to see watts kind of drop off here at the end. So some general analysis as I look at that, and if there are any problem areas, like if I see a spike in the heart rate, or if someone's got a super high heart rate for a long time and that really plummets down, or if someone's got a breaking point, say in hour 4, things just bottom out and they're really suffering, I'll go back and take a look at how things played out. A general easy analyses to look at or splitting your ride. You can say, like, show me this ride by distance. So you can kind of find, this is 109 miles it said, so you can find, call it like 50, whatever that is, 54 miles like this, and you can highlight this section, which will outline it on the map, but then it will also show you, here on the side, it'll show you on the side what your information for this was. So for this 54 miles, what was my intensity factor, my VI, my normalized power, 252, etc., right? So we can say, add that selection, we can say first 54, right? Like that. So I can have that first 54 dialed in, and I get those numbers. And then I can come back in here and say, all right, let's look at the second 54-ish here at that selection. I'll come back over the side here and I'll say second 54 like that. So my first 54, 225, second 54, 229. You can see that in the second 54, my watts dropped from 252 to 249. The IF went from 0.74 to 0.73, but the VI stayed the same. Heart rate wise, I was at 132 in the second half, and in the first half, I was at 130. So super, from an execution standpoint, looking at this, really from a macro level, looking down, great ride, right? Super steady all day. My body experienced roughly the same thing at the end as it experienced at the beginning. So my food went well, my pacing went well, the weather conditions were good. Couldn't ask for more from a bike ride in terms of we want it to be as boring as possible so we can do well on the run. So those are some basic analyses, things that I look at. From a training perspective, sometimes I'll go in at rides, and if I've got a key section where I'm riding at a particular intensity, I may want to highlight that and see what my heart rate's like and see if I can go ahead and repeat that in the next training session or so on. But in general, that's sort of the basic level of analysis that I do. I spend a lot more time looking at these sort of metrics on the sidebar here for the workout, making sure that overall the workout hit the metrics that I wanted. I'm not so much worried about a bad stretch of 20 minutes here or there. I don't get that granular. Each section of our training typically has a goal associated with a key workout, key ride, key run, key swim, what your TSS should be or what the work should look like. And in general, you just want to make sure that work is sort of falling into that space. All right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about a long run workout. So this is great. So before I get to a race, let's find a long run. Here's a long run that I did, and let's analyze it. So again, I typically look at the sidebar first. I say like, how long did I run for, right? So typically you've got a mileage goal associated with it. And then I will look at my cadence for that time overall, like am I close or not, and then my heart rate. So you can see my heart rate was pretty steady and low here. This is part of my sort of run easier, run smarter mentality approach to how I've been doing things, which is super important and gives you a sense of how things play out. So from dive down here to the chart, and I'll take a look at how things work. In general, again, from a run workout, I've always got a spike at the beginning, but outside that outlier, you can see how my heart rate basically built all day, which meant my pace was pretty consistent, which is what we want to see. We want to simulate your race experience with these longer runs, fueling them and taking care of yourself as need be. You can see that I took breaks here at the hour mark, at the 25-minute mark, and the hour and 40-minute mark. So maybe snack, water, food, potty break, who knows. But you kind of get that general sense of how things flow out. And you can also see how the pace played out as well. I don't see cadence here on this chart. It's not showing up. But you can show the pace as well, sort of how that played out and how the heart rate works. So over time, you'll see the heart rate comes up and starts to get closer and closer to my pace over time versus where it was earlier when I was much more rested. That's also very common. So in the Training Peak side of things, I would do more to look at specific laps and try and learn more about how I did well. If I've got an interval mile that I'm trying to hit, that would show up here if I lap my watch. If I've got a particular mileage target, etc. Pace or effort or wattage target, I would look for that here. In general, I just kind of want to make sure that my workouts finish stronger than I started, negative split wise. My heart rate built, didn't have any braking in there, or so on. Okay, and that goes forward through to a race as well. When I'm looking at a run file from a race here, I will also start off by saying, okay, what was my pace, basically for that run? Was I happy with that pace? What was my, now that I have a power meter, I would look at my intensity factor, make sure that matches with the power that I wanted to have. And what was my heart rate for that power? And that's something that I definitely used going forward. I had a good run in Tremblant, so I knew 315 was kind of a good number or sustainable number for me moving forward when I went to Kona and Cabo as well. I'll dive down in here and take a look at the overall charts for me and see where I'm at. Okay, so in this case, I had all my data on me, but I'm going to hide that. So hide the cadence. Let's hide the speed. Normally you might show speed. I'm going to hide it because I've got a power meter on my foot. And then heart rate. So you can see heart rate basically building all day. Coach P didn't get in trouble until about, what is that on the distance mileage there? About mile 23. Man, I was doing so awesome at mile 18. Woohoo! But mile 23, I definitely started to falter, and this is where things became really, really hard. But overall, you can see this general trend of building, starting with a low heart rate and building up. On race day, we're looking at a heart rate, this early heart rate in the 130s, very similar to what I saw on the bike, very easy. And I was able to keep kind of in those 130s all the way through halfway. It wasn't until the second half that it started to creep into the 140s range. And I can sustain a higher heart rate later in the day because I was smart earlier in the day. But most importantly, that I was super consistent. I really want to have this kind of layout for me over time. And even though my watts drop here in the second half relative to the first, you can see the heart rate continues to build because I've got that stress going into my body. This ends up being a great run for me. Very pleased with the performance, very consistent. And that's ultimately what we want. So I'll come in and look. And if I needed to, I could divide it up and say lap 1, lap 2. But again, when it looks this good macro-wise, I'm not worried about it. But you could go back in again and take a look at it. Sometimes you'll see people have gone too hard or messed something up in those early miles, maybe not running at their bike effort, but beyond that, you can kind of dive in and sort of review what that looks like, both from a positive side, like, hey, Coach Patrick says, I'm going to use these, 315 normalized as my target on my watch moving forward. But also from the negative side, which is like, oh, wow, running at 740 pace early in a long race is terrible because I had a terrible second half of my race. I now know that I don't want to do that, right? And what does that look like? Another element that I used for my training this year was I mapped out a lot of my training runs based off of the actual race paces that I ran. So I used to always run super fast, 640s. And then I said, you know what, like all my races on race day are 730s to 8s. Why am I running 640s just to run 730s? Do I need to do that? And so I really dialed the pace down this year. Felt like it made my training much more manageable. And that was, again, a result of using my data, okay, which I thought, ends up being like super duper important as we go through that, okay? All right, so we can talk a little bit now about analyzing what an interval workout looks like on the bike or the run as well. I know people want to see what that looks like. All right. Dear God, can Coach Patrick find? Coach Patrick never does intervals. Let's see if we've got some kind of interval training. Let's go back. Let's go way back. So you can definitely go, into the sidebar here and see like, hey, what can we do? All right. Let's go way back and see if Coach Patrick, see what I got here. Okay, here's a little like an interval session here. This is probably from a Trainer Road session, so it's a little funkier. So when we're analyzing a specific workout like this, there's different targets, that we're trying to hit. So this is a clearly an interval set. It's it's like a 12-minute interval, 3 by 12 minutes or something like that. Oops, sorry about that. It's a 3 by 12 minute session here that I'm trying to hit. Typically, I would label that 3 by 12. When you're after the workout, you can come in and just say 3 by 12 minute or something like that, so you can save it on your work. And I'll analyze it. I'll put the numbers in. So what do we see here in this section? Again, I don't typically look at cadence. I just look at watts and heart rate. If all I have is heart rate, maybe you do want to look at something like speed, but in general, not so much. And so what you see here is this sort of general build within each interval, which is definitely what we want. So this is a challenging set for me. So my heart rate got pretty elevated in the second set, and I pushed hard at the end, and I realized, hey, there's a lot more I could do here. And as a result, I spent a better time here, a little more aggressively in this third interval until it tapered out, and then I finished strong as well. And so when you think about managing your intervals, this is what you want to see. You want to see improvement heart rate wise through all of your intervals because you're stacking up that load. And ideally you see increasing or non-decreasing power, steady power for each of these sets. We don't want to see anything where the set breaks you and the power just drops off before you get there. And that's a classic sign that you're potentially overreaching. So when you're looking into a specific workout, we're trying to see what this interval set looks like and are you able to kind of push it. Now, if you just have heart rate data, we don't get a ton of information. If you have power, or even if you have cadence, like sometimes cadence can be an indicator of sort of how your work output is going across the day, right? So we'll see in this first interval, I'm fairly rested, so as my cadence drops and power goes up a little bit as I shifted. Over time, you'll see here that as I get more tired, I'm having to do higher cadence to get the power up, and again, higher cadence to get the power up. See how the cadence and the power match together much better here as once my trainer gets warmed up. So early data, probably not so good. It takes about 20 minutes for my trainer to get warmed up, and then it gets a little more synchronized over time. So when you think about how you're going to be managing your effort in an interval session, it's much more about how do you compare A, B, and C? What do those look like? And then how do they compare to last time? So typically I'll come in here and label this workout, and let's just say I can highlight this session here if I didn't do a lap on it. So that was normalized 289. This is 313, and this is 319. So I would come in here and just be like, 289, 313, 319, like that. So this way, when I'm back in my view of my calendar and stuff like that, now I can see what that is, and a lot easier for me to kind of dive in and take a look at that particular workout if I need to. But generally speaking, that's what I look at. Again, I don't spend a lot of time looking at individual workouts unless it's a key workout for the week, but that's one of the ways that I handle intervals there on the bike. Okay. For the run, it's very similar in terms of how we would look at, say, an interval run. I got to find something that's short enough that means I'm doing intervals. Clearly, I like to do a lot of running and really kind of beat myself up. All right, let's see here. I gotta find something that says Coach Patrick did intervals. All right, so this has a mile repeat. It's just 1 mile all the way down the end of the point there and back again. So again, this is an opportunity long before I have power. This is an opportunity for me to kind of track my fitness and see how I do. This would be something where I probably would go back and say, hey, okay, I ran a mile. What was my pace like in that mile? Or what was my heart rate in that mile? And I can come back and say, oh, okay, it was 625 or whatever that is. Take a tenth off of that. It's a 6-minute mile or something like that. This is what my heart rate looks like, and how do I want to handle it. For smaller, like hit out workouts like this, that's what I look at. For longer workouts, I want to make sure my heart rate doesn't drop off or fall off, and that. So from an interval perspective, it's very similar. From a long run perspective, it's much more about keeping that consistency in that training session. So when you have intervals, you probably got a really specific target for it, and you want to hit that. I don't spend a ton of time analyzing the swim and the swim performance. I don't see the upside for that overall in terms of what we're trying to achieve. But I do like to dive into those longer sessions, and that becomes more and more important as you're heading into your race. So you'll say, what are my bike goals at this race? Well, go back, So when I was planning, let me head over there now. Let me just head over to this year for, say, Tremblant, which is, since I break myself so often, there's plenty of times when I'm not. I'm heading into a race and I don't know what the heck's going on, right? So, when I'm heading into a race like Tremblant, I say, well, what do I want to do this run at? I've got some good run data here that says, hey, 0.84 is good. What does my pace look like? What does my heart rate look like? That all makes sense. Or even the long bike workouts, let's find a long bike. I got a bunch of 50-mile rides here. It looks like that is Tremblant itself, so maybe I was doing longer rides earlier in the week. Who knows? But I can go in and find some of these longer sessions and say, oh, let me look at these numbers. Let me see how I did, in terms of like comparing to other sessions. And then those numbers become a guideline for me. Not only my more historical numbers, but also the numbers that I have right now. And so that's just to circle back to the beginning of this watch, discuss, learn session, is that data really becomes a useful tool for me to make smart decisions and allow me to sort of set out what I want to achieve on a day. The better you know yourself, the better you can pace, the better you can execute, and the better you can set yourself up. And that's important not only in individual sessions, so you can stack session on session and week after week, but also on race days. So you can have a really smart start of your race, so you have a good middle, and then you have a better end than you would have had otherwise. So to recap for everybody out there listening at home, collecting that data is super important. There's a lot of stuff you can do with it. It's always a little bit harder than you think, but it's definitely worth the while. Great conversations today around how to do it, why to do it, where to do it, what to do with the data that you're getting on a macro level, and we can dive more into, run charts are more important in the run durability time, and bike charts are more important in season for the bike chart time and the volume time. But in general, I hope this is a useful tool for you to kind of get a little bit of sense about why the data is important, how to pull it together in general, and then what to do with it if you need to look at an individual file. If you have questions or follow-up, etc., please put it in the Power and Pace forum, or you can ask me your individual questions in your own personal threads in the official coach forum, assuming that you have some questions about your own data and so on. Okay? Thanks so much for tuning in. Really excited to share this with you guys. I hope it was helpful. I look forward to your feedback. I'll see you guys soon.